It's 10:30. Welcome to today's meeting of the Joint Assembly. We've got unusually a morning meeting only, which I'll just gently remind you of. It's a morning meeting. There isn't a lunch break because there isn't lunch, and so we need to really finish by lunchtime. And we have 3 items on our agenda. The first item is apologies for absence, and we have those from Annika Osborne, James Rolfe, and Heather Richards.
Chair, if I may, we've had late apologies as well from Christian Ann Rutter.
And Christian Ann Rutter, who's unwell. So I'll go to item 2, declarations of interest, and ask whether there are any of those that people want to make. We can also do so when we get to items. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting are in your agenda pack between pages 3 and 22. As we've done in the past, we've asked for people to identify if there are any issues which would lead to modifications to the minutes, and the page of points that have arisen is in front of you. Nick has been through these in relation to his notes and is happy that these are reflective of what happened. So could I ask you whether you're willing to accept those amendments and need to approve the minutes with those in? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. We then go to item 4, which is questions from members of the public. I can report that we've had 6 public questions, 2 on item 7, which is the one capturing wider benefits of the city deal, and 4 on item 8, the city access programme update, and we'll take those when we get to those items. The questions have all been published on the website and have been sent to you as members of the Assembly. So then, item 5, which is petitions, and I'm told that no petitions have been received. And we get then to the start of the substantive business, item 6. Given that we only have the morning, my suggestion is that probably the third of the 3 reports is the most substantial and will generate the most discussion. And so, just as a general guide on use of time, obviously things can happen, but I would suggest that we think about trying to accomplish the first 2 items in half an hour each, and then giving ourselves longer for the final item. Right, so item 6 is the quarterly progress report, and we don't have any public questions on that. I'm going to therefore go straight to Niamh, who's going to present this.
Thank you, Chair. So just to introduce Tom Kelly, colleagues will know Tom representing the Finance Department from our accountable body, and Thomas Fitzpatrick, another colleague from GCP. So there's 3 items here that we're specifically asking for you to look through. Aside from that, what's different this time about the report? So it sets out some of the progress around the work on the Gateway Review in section 3, and there's some really positive feedback around some of the evaluation that's been done, particularly around the Chisholm Trail, around kind of safety and quality. It was a pleasure to read that feedback. So just to draw members' attention to that if they haven't already seen it. So aside from that, the first point here, which is A, so on from the future investment strategy that we brought you in September, this is the budget. So in line with what you saw in September, so nothing specifically new around it, but to take you through the kind of detailed process around the proposal for what's being allocated where. The second point is a kind of bit of tidying up for colleagues to note that our delegations around TROs are in line with those of our accountable body, the County Council. So we are mirroring that just to be explicit. And C, we're asking you to note a change around the tech provider for the AV project. I'll leave it there, Chair, and wait for any points of clarification or questions.
Okay, thank you, Niamh. So what you highlighted there were the three points on which the board is going to be making a decision out of this report. And so at the end of our time on this, we need to express any views that we have on those three specific items. But obviously we'll do as we normally do, just call out the different parts of the report to see if people have questions or comments. So I think it would be appropriate to take the budget strategy element of this first, which comes up in section 13, page 52 to 56. Would you like us to just drive this with questions? Yeah, okay. So are there any questions in relation to the budget strategy, pages 52 to 56, please? Yes, there are a few. So, Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I've got slightly different numbering system, but I've got budget questions relating to 57 and 58, which are the financial implications, and in particular the concerns about future borrowing requirements, which are mentioned at the bottom of page 57. Where it describes that potential borrowing will be required in advance of these funds coming from currently unknown anticipated Section 106 contributions. And on page 68, where there is the draft budget described, there's anticipated requirements at the very bottom of the page about the forecast cash flow budget, and in future years, I've lost it now, but it's talked about hundreds of millions of pounds in 26, 27, and then future years from there. So I just wanted to clarify, firstly, what is the philosophy of the GCP about borrowing, who is expected to underwrite that borrowing, which does seem to be an enormous amount, and I apologise if I missed the amounts in the past, and whether or not there's opportunities to delay some of the projects until we're much more confident that some of the Section 106 contributions and other funds will be coming. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Karen, was that a related question, or could we perhaps take the answer to that, because it's quite a substantial question? So.
Thanks, Chair. Perhaps I comment and then invite Tom to comment as well. Just around the kind of philosophy point and the unknown Section 106 contributions as we describe them in the paper. There is work to do to refine that and to understand more about it, and officers need to run several scenarios and really test, I think, some of the points that you're making across the next several months, so we can understand more around what those figures are more likely to look like. But Tom perhaps might want to comment on your point around underwriting.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question and an issue that we're bringing into focus as part of the liaison that the report refers to. I think it's in for the Assembly's benefit, it's worth distinguishing between the overall over-programming deficit, which we see at the end of the cycle, and the cash flow need during that period. So in the County Council's capital budgeting, we would refer to this as repayable borrowing, and that does hinge, as Councillor Wilson has said, on the certainty around Section 106 in particular, and I think there will be options around, clearly we'll need to look at options around timing as well as other factors as we play through that cash flow profile. So in terms of the question of underwriting, if that's the right phrase, so as the accountable body, the county council has this would flow through the county council's capital programme and uses the county council's borrowing headroom or affordable borrowing limits within our with our compliance with the Prudential Code. So the type of figures that you can see referred to in the report are substantial, but in the context of the council's annual capital programme, they are within that sort of scale and commensurate. So it is a significant issue. There will be further considerations coming forward for the Assembly and the board, but there are still many variables we're looking at to kind of refine that.
So, Tom, you seem to be saying that although the figures on their own look concerning, that in the context of how capital spending programmes work, this is not an unusual situation, or it is?
So I think it is a large amount. So it is substantial in the context of the council's capital programme, but not completely beyond a kind of proportionate scale to our wider highways and broader capital investment across the piece.
But I think you're also saying it's appropriate to note this as something that does need to be followed through and a strategy developed.
It does need to be followed through, and I think at the stage that we're at, this is an appropriate place to be. So we're still several years, at this point we're still in surplus, of course, we're several years away from from that deficit. So I think as the accountable body, the finance team at the council are comfortable we're up to the right place in the moment in terms of having certainty, but as those parameters and variables narrow, we do need to kind of select scenarios and have more certainty about the interest and borrowing costs that will flow into the programme.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Karen next. That's okay. Oh, sorry. I was looking at you to see if you wanted to say anything.
Well, thank you. Tom mentioned that further work will be done, so that's ideal. I just feel that this is only a couple of years away, which in local authority terms isn't very far away. And I would like some assurance of when we're going to hear more about what is being planned and what the options are, so that we can have a proper debate about it. Thank you.
Just the other thing I would add is that as we move into that deficit position, it becomes all the more important that that the GCP projections are factored into the County Council's capital strategy as well. So we've in liaison with GCP officers, we're making sure that we will be able to kind of receive the results of GCP's budget scrutiny in the early and mid-autumn, so that we can factor that into the council's plans as well. Now, I think we have seen kind of shifts in timescales before, so in terms of the GCP's plans, so we'll keep that in view, but we're actively looking at bringing this particular issue back in the near future, and certainly to have decision-making around it in the autumn.
So did I hear autumn? Is the answer to the question? Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Karen.
Thank you. I guess I had a wider question about the future of the skills programme, but it does have budgetary. Obviously, if we were to do something in the future, have some budgetary issues as well. So is there still flexibility within the budgets going forward? I know there's an allocation for this year, but for repurposing and potentially for additional extension of skills activities.
Thanks, Karen. So as it currently stands, should the board and joint assembly approve the numbers in front of them, that there is no more allocation for skills funding. However, it's up to the joint assembly and the board to prioritise the programme in the way that that suits the objectives of the city deal. Does that answer your question?
I think my wider question, which maybe I'll come to under the skills, is how are we going to do that? How are we going to look at the skills, the future of that programme and the needs and what the role of GCP might be within that?
So the situation you're describing is that the skills has a provision in the upcoming year's budget, but not after that. Okay.
So it takes us to the end of the current contract, which is April 25.
Got it?
Sorry, can I just add?
Go on, Rachel, yeah.
I mean, that might sound harsh, but in terms of the objectives of the city deal, we've achieved and gone beyond the target that was set. So it does relate to the previous discussion. You know, when you're in an over-programming situation, then you need to prioritise. And it's hard for, you know, us to justify prioritising skills in that environment when you've met the target that was set for the city deal, and others are responsible for delivering on skills in this geography. But as Niamh says, obviously the board could choose to do otherwise, and the reason that the programme has been extended beyond hitting the apprenticeship target is because that was a choice that the board made, but it would need to come back again on that basis.
Thank you. Heather?
Thank you. So my questions mainly relate to page 68, but sort of touch on the whole borrowing thing. So on the section 106 contributions, so I don't know whether I should declare it's not, I sit on planning in South Cambridgeshire, and we've been very careful when conditions and for the section 106 that actually for things like CSET, for example, it's or an alternative, because until the project's up and running and we know there's a budget issue, it may morph into something else. So that's something that as a planning committee we've been doing, but there are lots of consents that probably were given requiring contributions prior to us knowing that there was potentially some instability with the project, and there may be others. So ahead of borrowing, how sure are we that actually the way that the Section 106 has been drafted will enable us to draw down those? So what safeguards are in place? Because I think that's quite, the variances now are quite different. And we know in other cases we've actually lost out on money because a project's changed, but the 106 was agreed for a specific project. So that's my first question. The other question I have in relation to funding is energy income, because there's not a single figure that I can sort of see on that line, so it might be that it's zero, unless I'm following the wrong line. And I would just think from and perhaps it is sort of the accountant in me, I like to see zeros if it's null, because that gives us a reference check that it's not just something that's missing. So I always put in reports a figure, even if it's zero, and we can see it's happened in some places and not others. So that makes me worry that actually it's something that's just an inaccuracy. So I think they're probably the two main things. Just one other, affordable housing. Obviously, that's something that we have sort of struggled with. There's always sort of in the amber, and we're not quite progressing along. Doesn't kind of look like there's much going on there. Is that something that's just
So that's not in the
dropped?
budget? Is it?
I'm looking at the line operational budget, affordable housing.
Oh, sorry. You're right. I just
Right
got
there
it
in
wrong.
black and white, Chair.
Right, okay. Fine. Okay, thank you. Niamh?
Thanks, Councillor Williams. So on the Section 106 assumptions, so the information that you see in your report is all drawn from the County Council planning team. So the work that you describe around ensuring that those that kind of detail has been run through is absolutely a consistent part of this process, and that will continue to be drawn in from the County Council planning team as these assumptions are refined.
Go ahead.
I think just on that point, I appreciate the county council make the recommendations. What I'm saying is us as planning members, we sometimes make changes to those. And it's that sort of situation. For example, we change wording literally in the meetings. So just to double check, so obviously the district and the city council are the planning authorities that actually sign it off.
Sorry, to be very explicit, in collaboration with the district councils, how those Section 106s are signed, negotiated, edited, changed, that all flows through into the final assumptions. So we've got a really good working relationship with colleagues at both districts to make sure that that process is coming through. Yeah, just on energy, agreed. We'll make sure that that's clear. There should be a zero in there. And on affordable housing, so that the figure that was against affordable housing across the last few years was a nominal sum, and had previously been allocated for the sort of various studies that the board had agreed to take forward. The proposal now is that nominal sum, which is about £50,000, is removed from that line and is put back into the bottom line to tackle the over-programming problem that we've got, because there are no substantial recommendations around anything on affordable housing.
Thank you.
Thank you. So on affordable housing, obviously we see that we've not met the 1,000 house, which was part of the objectives. So we're saying that that's no longer something that the GC... Sorry, I just wasn't quite clear. It was almost like we're dropping that. I don't think that's what you're saying, but that's how it sounded.
So just to clarify, the commitment that we've got on rural exception sites comes via the planning system. That commitment remains a commitment and will be brought forward in line with what the report sets out.
Thank you. Simon?
Yes, I just want to revisit the numbers around the forecast deficit. Is that 260 million deficit assuming success through the 200 million gateway? Okay. And the forecast income from Section 106 is 185. So how is the deficit between, that's assuming all the Section 106 monies come in, and that's a big assumption because they're all at risk. How is the deficit going to be bridged between 260 and 185?
I think that was the question that Graham asked at the beginning.
Yeah, well,
I don't know, is there anything else that you can say, Tom? Sorry.
No, probably nothing further to add in terms of the mechanism for the deficit to be financed. But I thought that was a slightly different question, actually, about the certainty of Section 106 and yeah.
Sorry, if I mean that is a different question. So there are a series of moving parts. One is when are we going to deliver things, and when is money going out the door? And we are 7 years into the city deal, and for 7 years we've been in net positive cash flow. So cash flow has not been an issue. As we rightly get towards the end of construction, particularly of the larger schemes, then actually do we deliver a scheme in 27 or 28? In terms of the overall budget, it doesn't have any impact, but in terms of cash flow, that's actually really quite important. So moving that around, and I think that was the nature of Graham's question, do you do things something slightly slower or not? That is clearly still open to us. The income side is actually probably the very interesting bit. We GCP officers have taken a cautious approach to Section 106 income. So we have worked with Heather as planning officers, your planning officers, the County Council highways and planning officers, and we've got numbers from them. Thus far, we have taken a cautious approach in terms of those numbers. We clearly need to go back round that loop and say we can probably be more ambitious in terms of the overall quantum. And then the second question is, and then in terms of the relative timing. So whether we've got a larger financial problem or whether we've just got a cash flow problem. In terms of the wider number, we are in an over-programmed position because at the moment, the city deal, the three partners signed to say that there would be a contribution locally of £500 million. The Section 106 is not coming through quite as anticipated, so we've not quite met, at the moment, that £500 million expectation. But actually, as we all know, there's an awful lot going on in this geography, and one would hope that that headroom actually exists, and so we don't have to take a decision around prioritisation. But ultimately, if it came to it, decision makers would be saying within the available budget, over the available remaining period of time, this is how we would see the programme being developed. And a final one, and then please come back, is I think we've had this conversation in this chamber before, that to some intents and purposes, 2030 guillotine is a bit random for a whole host of reasons, one of which is actually infrastructure needs to continue given the growth pressures that we face. And so we should be making sure that we make the absolute best fist of the City Deal opportunity, but we need to increasingly look beyond that 2030, and others are doing it in other forums.
Saying that
I was quoting the chamber, back to the chamber, Chair. Maybe I'll stop there.
So I think, thank you for that, Peter. I'm so long in the tooth, I've been through so many property cycles. And then there was one which lasted for 8, 9, 10 years where developers just could not get development finance and very little was developed. And therefore, there was no Section 106 monies. And at the moment, we're granting loads of planning applications for development, and I'm not seeing an awful lot coming out of the ground. And so it's this cyclical nature of these cycles, which are accompanied by astronomically high interest rates, that presents a real risk if you're going to rely on a flow of Section 106 income to cover your deficit. So I'm with Councillor Wilson on this. I think we need to be much better informed about all the underlying assumptions that are going to go ahead on this, and this assembly is socialised and informed and educated on this issue, because I think it is one that we do need to scrutinise in more detail. Yeah.
Sorry, Rachel?
Just very briefly, that's why you had the future investment strategy that was looking at the next 5 years, and why you paused one of the major schemes, or the board did. So it's a moving feast, but we will always bring you a timely decision when it's needed. But, until everything becomes clearer, you can't necessarily say how it's going to pan out for the next 5 years. That's what we're trying to explain.
And I think we've got a commitment that we will be able to review this and drill down a bit more with latest data in the autumn.
And it will be an annual process now.
Which is what you wanted previously.
Yeah,
Okay.
You wanted an annual process. You didn't want to leave it for a 3 or 5 year period.
That's what we committed to in September.
Well, conscious of the agenda we've got, are there any more questions on the budget, or can we move on to the other sections here? No more questions that I see. So I think we've got we registered very clear concern and interest for the Assembly to be involved in a look at the future funding of the programme and the priorities and how the mechanics for how we will adjust if we're asked to, and the variables that underlie that. So can we move on to the rest of the quarterly progress report? And so I'm going to do what we normally do, and that is to go through, call out the different sections to see if anyone has anything to raise. There is only under a couple of these sections is there something that the board is going to decide. So the first section to call out is the transport one, which is in appendices 31 to 37, pages 31 to 37. And this, I think, includes the delegation of authority in relation to TROs. Karen.
Okay. Actually, I had a point before we got to the transport, if I could, about the gateway review and some of the evidence that's being gathered. That's just before that in the paper. Can I make that point now?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, yes, there is not. Yeah.
I noted in one of the paragraphs, one of the updates, that there's been some independent review of some of the evidence that you've produced. Is that ever shared with the Joint Assembly? Is that appropriate? Because I think it might be helpful for us to see others' feedback on the programmes as well.
So the reference to independent review is quite interesting, the way that the government are carrying out this process. So we are asked to do a range of evaluations. And our sort of package of work is sent across to a government-appointed independent panel, which I think you're referring to. We get a level of feedback from that panel, but most of that feedback goes into the government as a sort of commentary on how they assess that things are going. So I'll go back to the ranch and just understand that kind of flow of information and how we might best share it here.
Thank you. You had a question on
Yeah,
the
on
transport
transport.
section, yeah.
If I go ahead on that.
Go
as
ahead,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, I just think, just looking at the RAG rating of the transport projects, once we have the original target dates in there, it's very clear to see that some of them have slipped quite significantly. And it's just thinking about what lessons we're taking from that as we plan the future projects as well. And if there is anything we can factor in to try and avoid those slippages in the future.
Thanks, Karen. Peter, is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, principally the issues are planning and land acquisition, which I suppose we sort of could have written down. So we are aware of all of the schemes down that require planning requirements. We're doing it in a slightly different way with planning partners. And so, I am as confident as I can be that planning will not be an impediment going forward. Now, there's a few issues floating around, but in that sense, land is always going to be problematic, and it's going to be problematic depending on the nature of the scheme. So for some schemes, you're buying a big parcel of land from one landowner, and that's relatively straightforward. For some of the other schemes, and I'll use a generic Greenway example, actually over a relatively small scheme and a small distance, there are a large number of landowners. So if I use the Oakington to Cotton as an example, where we are in discussions with a large number of landowners over quite a small area. So we are aware of these pressures, and that's factored into our delivery program. But primarily it's those two reasons.
Thanks, Peter. I've got Katie next.
This is to do with, my question is to do with CSET and the pausing of CSET. And the South Cambridge station is going to be completed at the end of this year, and it will be operational within 3 to 6 months next year. And my question is, could we have a report maybe at the next assembly about the walking, cycling, public transport infrastructure, which the county and GCP and maybe the combined authority are doing to support the the arrival of South Cambridge Station, and what is the impact of CSET not being delivered or aligned with the South Cambridge Station opening? Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, simple. There we go. Yes. Paul.
I was wondering if officers could expand on the planning issues impacting Camborne to Cambridge. I know residents of Camborne are very keen to see Camborne to Cambridge come forwards. And the scheme is also providing the only active travel route from Camborne to Cambridge. There is no other route other than cycling on St Neots Road, the old A428, which is pretty horrible. Normally, development will be gated by availability of the transport infrastructure, but in this case, the transport infrastructure seems to be gated by the development. So I'm just trying to understand the logic of this, because I understand there are planning issues that are impacting this, but the logic seems kind of counterintuitive to me. So maybe if there's anything to say on that.
Thanks, Paul. Who would like to answer that? Peter?
The infrastructure. The infrastructure and the housing development along that corridor are inextricably linked, and they both need to be brought forward in concert and arguably in a timely manner. And where one of those issues, such as the planning for the housing, has a problem, then that has a direct implication on the infrastructure. This was obviously a particular issue that was raised by the planning inspector during the local plan hearing anyway. And so the relationship, particularly with Bourne and West Cambridge, to the Camborne to Cambridge route and the associated active travel route, they are inextricably linked. And so if there is if there's a slowdown on zinc and the economic development side, then that is going to impact the infrastructure being brought forward.
Thanks, Peter. You want to come back, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose just from a Camborne resident's point of view, that's obviously very disappointing. I understand the link between, you know, development and infrastructure. And I kind of worry about other things that may, you know, just prevent this from moving forwards. For instance, East West Rail. You know, what are the risks related to East West Rail on Camborne to Cambridge as well, because of the interactions between those two schemes potentially. So just kind of worry that, you know, there are too many variables and too many risks preventing this from coming forwards. I'm not really expecting an answer to that question or to that statement.
I think it might be helpful. East West Rail is not yet a material consideration because there is no scheme. The East West Rail Company are revising their business case, and that may or may not include a revised route alignment. And we here are planning to come forward with some form of consultation at the moment, a consultation this year. But their scheme does not have planning. It is not, you know, there's no sort of sense of agreement or statutory basis for consideration of that. But clearly that's not the case with the local plan. I understand, I hear, and actually I sympathise with the view of Camborne, but the infrastructure, because we are a local plan-led organisation, the infrastructure is linked to the local plan, which is Bourne and West Cambridge. That's the basis upon which we've developed the scheme, and we couldn't sort of halfway through the game try to change the rules, unfortunately. That would be, you've heard me too many times saying we have to follow the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Karen.
So my question also related to the Camborne to Cambridge delays as well, but it was more of the wider issue of the water, because it seems to be the water supply is being given as the reason for some of the planning delays. And the question is around what is the role of GCP, if anything, in addressing some of the water issues. I know we've discussed this before, but we have done something in, obviously, where there's been a deficit in electricity supply. But is there a role, if this is really a significant blocker, what is the role of GCP in addressing this, if any?
Thanks, Karen.
And we are here to support our statutory colleagues. So the issue that you've cited relates to the local plan. I know local plan colleagues are vexed and engaged in this in equal measure. We are providing briefing notes, technical support and everything else we reasonably can. But the response has to come from the relevant statutory agency, because we don't want to overcomplicate this, and we are supporting them and stand ready to support them with anything else they may require.
And Peter, when you say statutory agencies, you mean the local planning authorities. So 2 of our component councils are really owning this issue. I guess I'm pretty confident in saying that it's a very, very important issue and high priority for both of them. And I think we got involved in the electricity grid issue because it appeared through situations we were in and the availability of some money that we could make a difference. But I think that is really not the case with water. So are there any other questions on the transport section? Claire.
Thank you. Point of detail, please, on Eastern Access. There's reference in the papers to the drainage strategy and a delay on the drainage strategy. But in the RAG rating, it's still shown as green and with a date of 2027. But there are also, and we know because we asked the board to look again at Elizabeth Way and the Park and Ride. So maybe just a quick update on that, please.
So there'll be a report at the next Assembly and Board cycle on, particularly on the Park and Ride, following further work that's been done, and hopefully that will provide some reassurance. The drainage strategy is oversharing. It doesn't impact in terms of the delivery timeframe. The delivery strategy, the drainage comment is oversharing. It's not going to impact in terms of delivery strategy timelines.
So thank you, everyone. On transport, no one has referred to the TRO proposal, so I'm assuming there are no comments on that. And we'll go to the next section, which is on skills. I think there is a question on that, which I think Karen wants to follow through on. So go ahead, Karen.
Yes, thank you. It's, again, just noting the significance, of skills to the future of this region. It's how we would consider, and I acknowledge that we have delivered, GCP has delivered on what it initially set out to, but it's understanding, is there a role for GCP in the future to continue some activity in this space, and how we would have those discussions and make any decision on that, given that the current programme ends next year.
Thanks, Karen. Eve?
So if you'd specifically like officers to bring something forward, we could do that. That's one option.
And another option is for that not to happen.
Is to not do that. So to help shape the debate, to help shape the information that you've got to hand, we could, in advance of the next group of this group meeting, can work with members of the skills working group and perhaps the wider board and joint assembly to set out what's happened, how that aligns with what the combined authority and other colleagues are doing, to understand some of that wider context, if you'd find that helpful.
Thank you. Claire?
Yes, I'd like to follow that up. I think that would be really helpful, and to put it in the wider context of what CPCA are doing and what county skills are doing as well, because it's a tripartite approach to skills. So I think it would be really helpful to have an overall look. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Katie?
Yes, and I'm really concerned about the construction industry. There's a lot of talk about development in this area and speeding up construction, but we don't have the resources in the industry now to speed up. And we have all the districts and the combined authority, the county, have targets regarding reducing energy in homes, and retrofitting construction skills are different from new build construction skills. So I don't know whether could there be some information about apprentices within the construction industry to kind of clarify what's happening. Thank you.
I think the issue there is that outside STEM, it was never on our radar screen. But Niamh, I think perhaps we can roll up all the questions, really. I mean, I think that we would like to see a report on the follow-through for what we've started up, recognising that may or may not be us, but the way that we can kind of see the legacy of what we started up not being wasted and being built on, if possible, through the sort of areas that Katie's talking about.
Yep, so I guess your commentary will go to the board.
Yes.
And officers are happy to assist in any way we can.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. See no more hands, so I'm going to take the opportunity to go to the SmartWorks screen, where I believe there was this question about the change in the delivery of the AV project. Are there any comments on that? Or any other aspect of the SmartWorks stream? Sorry. You're very active today.
I am, sorry. Had a big breakfast. Yeah, sorry, I did have a question about the review of the guidance systems. If at some point we could get an update on that, because I think, as I understood it when I went on a tour, that is quite critical to the delivery of some of the schemes, and so it'd be very helpful to get an update on that, please, at some point.
Sorry, I'm just conferring with my colleague.
Yeah.
Any comments on that, aside from we're happy to provide that?
So we are looking at guidance systems at the moment. Obviously, the work that we're doing in the automated vehicle project, part of that is looking at automated guidance systems, and we are looking to see whether they would be appropriate for guided busway.
Okay, thank you. Claire?
Yes, so on the smart signals, and this came up at the last meeting, didn't it? And thank you for the author of the report. But this is on 9.21 on the controlled trial at the Robin Hood junction in Cherry Hinton. I wonder when these trials are started or in place, whether there's any public consultation, any public information about what's happening, that what the trials are about, what information is being gathered, how that will be fed back to the public.
So we did put out into the public domain that we were doing the trials. We didn't actively engage with local communities, but we will make the report available so that people can see the results of the trials.
Thank you. Peter,
Chair,
you were
if I
bursting
may,
to say something.
I'll be really quick. There is something about signals that you want to maximise the benefit of the network without anybody noticing. Yeah? So it's a bit like the sort of the Sir David Brailsford marginal gains. So actually, you might reassign the time of each junction to a particular mode. You might give it to buses or you might give it to cyclists. And if nobody notices, actually what's happened is the buses get an incremental benefit. And so there's a balance I think you've got to draw between actually shouting about it and not. Now, there may be some instances, such as pedestrian countdowns, where you want to make this very visible. You want to encourage people to cross in certain timelines. So I think it's the nature of what you're trying to achieve. At the moment, I think we're really trying to get the maximum benefit out of our signal system because we think there's more that it can do. And that's, I think we've got to balance the public messaging on that.
So I'm wary of turning this into a masterclass in the smart work stream. Is it something that is not going to take us there?
I take Peter's point. Of course, I take Peter's point. I do think there's something about sort of public engagement, and it's for maybe a discussion outside here. But I mean, obviously, I know about what's happening at the Robin Hood junction, but I know because I sit in these meetings and read reports. I think it's just about public engagement, but we can take that offline.
Okay, so that I think I'm taking as the smart work stream, and no comment in relation to the decision the board is making on that. We come to housing, page 49 to 50. Then economy and environment, page 51. Okay. And I think we are done on the quarterly progress report. So thank you very much, Niamh and colleagues, in relation to all of that. We've got some points that we, I think, have stamped on that report, really, that we are looking for that review in the autumn about the capital funding and deficits and cash flow and variability of other sources and so forth. On CSETs, we wanted to have at our next meeting a report on the combined effect of the arrival of the Cambridge South Station together with the potential non-arrival of CSETs. We want to see a report on the follow-through on the skills programme as well. So thank you very much for all of that. And we go to the next item. So the next item is item 7 on the capturing the wider benefits of the city deal. So we do have some public questions here. And I'm going to ask for those questioners to come forward with those questions. I've got David Stoughton on behalf of Living Streets and Josh Grantham on behalf of CamCycle. And I think Isabel is going to present the report, but we'll deal with the questions first. So let's do the questions first. And David Stoughton. Good morning.
And please forgive my slightly blocked nose. I hope I'm going to say this all clearly. So Living Streets welcomes the GCP's recognition, finally, that walking and wheeling is the most common mode of transport in the city. We now need a GCP strategy to translate that evidence into action. The National Walking Survey of 2019 found that 31% of over 65s has stopped walking, and 48% would walk more if pedestrian environments were safer. We find it offensive that the GCP will fund expensive technological fixes, such as Starling crossings, but not invest in improving key walking routes across the city. Designating some key walking routes as investment routes will enable GCP to resurface key sections of pavement, as well as installing micro gardens, benches, and removing pavement obstructions. This aligns with the GCP strategy and investment work elsewhere that's included resurfacing roads in the course of developing new projects. It would not undermine the relationship between the GCP as infrastructure and county highways as maintenance. GCP could pioneer a response to National Living Streets research of 2023 that exposed the economic cost of outdoor falls to the NHS and social care. Costs difficult to assess because a defined road traffic injury must include a vehicle. RTI statistics therefore don't include pedestrian accidents, and they often go unreported to local authorities and in hospital admissions. Living Streets has existing case studies of need and benefit to contribute to a quick wins programme and welcomes constructive discussion with the GCP. Our question is whether the GCP will take up the challenge to respond to what people struggling to walk in our city have clearly stated that they need: decent walking routes to stations, to workplaces, to shops, and to other amenities. And will you ensure that your ideas for quick wins are grounded in people's walking and wheeling lived experience, so that the GCP becomes a champion and a model for transforming the pedestrian environment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. We'll come to that after the next question. But thank you for that. And the next question was from Josh Grantham on behalf of CamCycle, who is here after all.
I just missed the preamble earlier, but snuck in.
Go ahead, please, Josh.
Thank you. Agenda item 7 focuses on positioning the GCP favourably as it approaches the second Gateway Review. There are some positive aspects within this agenda item, and this holistic approach is something that CamCycle and others have been calling for a long time. However, when reviewing progress, one must also review their failures. The GCP and the bodies it represents must examine what is not working and what can be improved. Organisationally, there will be little room for growth without reflection and learning. Within this agenda item, we are surprised to see the inclusion of the green and blue infrastructure strategy, with only 2 short paragraphs dedicated to explaining its purpose and content. Across the 3 documents seeking approval, there are nearly 200 pages of detail and, very importantly, a design code. This is a critical document that should set out how the greenways will be delivered. Within it are meant to be greenway-specific requirements. Under design elements, there is a section 3.6 on lighting. However, there's almost no meaningful guidance provided. It does not establish preferences for lighting, where it should or could be suitable, and doesn't even mention solar studs, whose use in areas that will not be lit will be vital. The discussion around how the greenways will be lit has persisted for years. Now is the moment to resolve it, and this document should address that. So, does the Joint Assembly believe this guidance sets out a clear way for lighting to be designed on the Greenway network?
Thanks, Josh. Isabel, would you like to address those 2?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So thank you to both questions for the feedback on the paper. Taking the Living Streets question first, so the paper does suggest that although the GCP schemes will greatly benefit people walking and wheeling in those areas, there is more that could be done to enhance the general environment. And in particular, as suggested in the question, the GCP could look further at key routes to and from stations, schools, other locations. And that will be important for everyone, but especially for vulnerable road users. And as such, there would be an overlap with this work and the work that is also suggested in the paper around accessibility. So subject to the discussion at the Joint Assembly, the decision of the Executive Board, if we did want to look further at this, Office would develop some quick win options for potential improvements, including, for example, better walking routes to our rail stations. And as that, we would be happy to receive and discuss the Living Streets case studies. Taking then the CAM cycle question, so with regard to the Greenways Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy, this document has been developed with input from stakeholders on the GCP's Landscape, Heritage and Environment Forum, which includes the relevant technical specialists at the Shared Planning Service. The document provides guidance to designers, but as we've kind of talked about previously, the key principle is that designs have to be tailored to the local environment that they go through. On lighting, the document seeks to ensure designers consider lighting that is sympathetic to its surrounding environment while supporting pedestrian and cycle movements. It is not a document that sets out technical standards. The overarching principle has always been as a minimum to incorporate solar studs unless there is a specific environmental reason not to, and that is in line with the County Council's Active Travel Design Guide.
Thanks, Isabel. Obviously, members will reflect on those questions and answers in their discussion. Would you like to go ahead and present the,
yes,
the main
thank you,
report?
Chair, and I'll try to be as brief as possible because I know you want to get on to discussing this and onto the subsequent items. So as the City Deal approaches its second gateway review, the government's evaluation process will consider how the programme supports local economic growth. But alongside that, there is an opportunity to consider how the City Deal investment is supporting a broader range of impacts which contribute to long-term community prosperity and quality of life in Greater Cambridge. So the paper does look at progress to date at delivering the City Deal against the original objectives, and I kind of won't go through that in detail, but there's a list of delivery so far. What it then does is it moves on to setting out opportunities for maximising the value of the GCP's investment by enhancing the environmental, social and community benefits of the City Deal. And that's because we know that for Greater Cambridge to continue to create, attract and retain its world-leading businesses, it needs to be somewhere that people want to live, that values every member of the community and that offers sustainable ways of living and access to nature in the face of climate change. The paper uses a model of 5 capitals to understand kind of the wider impact of the deal and the opportunities across human capital, social capital, natural capital, physical capital and institutional capital. And it then goes on to highlight opportunities to further enhance the outcomes of the programme. So in particular, looking at undertaking some further work to explore walking and wheeling, so looking at enhancements to the walking environment, potentially focusing on first and last mile connectivity, also looking at things, some options around kind of biodiversity and nature-based solutions within the urban area, how we might be able to kind of improve climate resilience, possibly linking in with one of the GCP's existing projects. It looks at how the programme could enhance accessibility of Greater Cambridge, so potentially around accessibility for disabled people, for women and girls, and others who have traditionally found it more difficult to take advantage of new transport infrastructure, and then also exploring further some opportunities for delivering community infrastructure alongside our projects. And the paper does, kind of as we've mentioned in terms of the questions, also include the Greenways Green and Blue Infrastructure Strategy, and that's an example of taking this kind of cross-cutting approach and putting it into practice. So as well as providing guidance to the designers of the Greenways, it also looks at some of the opportunities to enhance that network through the provision of infrastructure such as rest stops, play on the way, mobility hubs or nature stops. The delivery of the opportunities in the Greenways strategy as well as across the programme more generally will need to be done in the context of the GCP's financial position. So as such, this paper isn't about kind of doing lots and lots of new things. It's more about how do we enhance the current programme first, where we might want to look for kind of match funding for some of these wider opportunities as well. So the Joint Assembly is asked to consider the progress to date and the work we've undertaken to understand the potential wider benefits of the City Deal, to discuss the areas we've outlined for further exploration and to consider the proposal to endorse the Greenways GBI strategy. The paper is designed to facilitate reflections on the programme as we prepare for the Gateway Review, thinking particularly how we can secure those wider benefits from the City Deal, the legacy the deal will leave in terms of quality of life and the foundations that it will build for any future investment strategy. So it is kind of an opportunity to sort of reflect on those, which we would then take forward into the complementary report, which the GCP prepares to sit alongside the Gateway review process, and is an opportunity to kind of set out that sort of progress and kind of future programme in a more strategic sense.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I wanted to surface a suggestion to the Assembly. I completely get the connection of having a Greenways green and blue infrastructure strategy with this subject. The connection is obvious. And as an illustration that we're working on that, I suspect very few of us would have a problem with that at all. I think it's a good idea. But I think there is a sense in which asking us to agree what that infrastructure is today on a background papers is probably something that ought to have a report of its own and a proper scrutiny, because it's ancillary to the main purpose of this report. And as we've heard, there is an appetite to challenge it and kind of make sure that's what we really want. My suggestion is that we ask for that to come back as a report on its own to discuss at our next meeting. And I'm assured that that wouldn't actually be holding up any of the actions that are consequent on it. So is that something that members would be comfortable with, so that we can give that proper attention on its own and just accept that working on it is an example of what we're looking at for ancillary benefits? Okay, so the things that we are asked then to look at are on page 69, which then would be little a, b and c. And I would ask for members' comments and questions, please. Paul, Christopher, thank you. Go ahead, Paul.
So in 2018, the Centre for Cities reported that Cambridge was the most, had the highest level of inequality in the UK, or maybe more accurately, inequity, I think. And I do believe that most of the GC's projects do actually address inequality. For example, the skills programme, affordable housing programme, providing transport for those that don't have a car or can't drive, so that they can access education and employment opportunities and health services. I suppose I couldn't see in the framework anything about that benefit. So there is the human capital strand in the framework, but I wondered if we were kind of missing something there that we should include, which is addressing inequality in Greater Cambridge. Maybe using another model, such as Kate Raworth's donut economics or something like that, or whether it can be built into this framework.
Thanks, Paul. Christopher?
Thank you. It's more a note rather than anything that comes out very strongly in this report, referenced in the earlier reports, that of course the City Deal is fundamentally about growth and sustaining growth and enabling further growth. And it's great that that is reflected in here. And as we look to the next Gateway review, it's very easy for us to think about everything down into the detail of individual programmes, but just making sure that we constantly reference back what we were lent or given the money to do in the first place. And I just think it's important to make sure that we strengthen that point rather than just get down into individual bits. There's reference, target 44,000 more jobs in there, which of course goes back to one of my favourite comments raised regularly here, which is things we're doing, does it really handle the scale of ambition that the City Deal originally envisaged for the area in which we are here to unlock? Thank you.
Thanks, Christopher. I mean, I suspect that is a different report another day, because this is specifically dealing with the benefits that are supplemental to the economic benefits. But and that's because we're asked to do that as part of the Gateway review. Katie?
Yeah, I'd like to make the point and ask the officers to work closely with the City Council to ensure GCP activities and spending on the physical, natural, social and human capital are closely aligned and integrated with the plans and strategies that the city is already working on. And that in some instances, spending may be more effective or best value by spending existing city council programmes in those areas, or commissioning the city council as a delivery body to implement some of the GCP's objectives. One of the examples, there's been some EV infrastructure for taxis, which has been a good example. So delivering EV charge points in car parking spaces. I've got a few more points. The other, with regard to walking and cycling that's been raised, I know the LTN 120, when it came out a few years ago, there was a requirement for a walking infrastructure strategy and a cycling infrastructure strategy. I think it's a county council obligation, and I think they've begun looking at that. But having a walking infrastructure plan for Cambridge overlaid with a really good cycling infrastructure, regardless of the main routes taken by vehicles, would be hugely beneficial. And it would also help the question which keeps coming up is about when the greenways arrive in the city, where do they go? What happens? And this is partly because I don't think we've ever really discussed the impact of the removal of the last combined authorities, mayors, combined the metro, which was to get across the city, which would have helped the greenways coming in. There would have been a metro system that would have really impacted the getting across and around the city. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Isabel, would you like to comment on those three?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So thank you for the comments around inequality and how that's picked up in the framework. So I think at the moment we've kind of picked it up implicitly in terms of things like equality of access to opportunity and inclusion, but we can look at whether we should do that more explicitly, because in the paper we reference some of the analysis that's been done around the Chisholm Trail. We know that Camborne to Cambridge should have a kind of very positive impact in terms of access to education as well. So there is opportunities to do more of that analysis, and we'll kind of reflect on how we include that. I think in terms of kind of comments around growth, kind of as the Chair said, this is not the focus of the paper, although we do include some commentary there on how kind of the programme as a whole will meet the strategic objectives. So that's something that we can kind of build on in terms of the complementary report. We certainly will work with City Council colleagues in terms of integrating this work, and kind of, as you said from your examples, that's kind of something that we do already. We're definitely not looking to kind of duplicate or displace any activity. I think particularly given our kind of budget situation, but kind of the situation more generally, kind of in terms of the public sector, that's not something we would want to do. So it's very much around kind of finding complementary ways of going about this. In terms of the comments around walking, and it is a kind of county responsibility in terms of that work, and some kind of progress has been made on that. We have done some work as well within the GCP in terms of that linking up between the greenways, things like the project that we called Cycling Plus, but did kind of have benefits for walking as well, which identified a number of routes that would help kind of link up the city, but kind of something to kind of put in that category, I guess, of things that where the current programme can make some progress, but also we've sort of set out where we might need to go going forward, as well as we move beyond the City Deal programme and kind of as future growth continues in the area.
I guess that those questions actually highlight one of the themes of your report, that it's not that the GCP itself has the capacity to do all the good things that we want to talk about, but that partly because we in the end won't have any money for that, but that it opens up how we do things so that we can work with partners like the City Council and like the County Council on the walking strategy. Yeah, okay. Other questions? Claire Ruskin, Claire Daunton, Brian.
we continue with the dilemma that the country needs Cambridge and Cambridgeshire to grow as quickly as it can, but we, as residents, obviously want better quality of life. We want it to be more green and pleasant. So I think bringing out that dilemma would be useful in this paper again. We know it's there. Trying to reduce some of the inequity, Paul, that you referred to. I think figure 3 is very good as a way of showing what we're trying to do. More of those examples would be good. So the more we can use that basis, it's very helpful. And addressing David's point, I absolutely endorse the walking routes. Many of the potholes are being filled in at the moment. My route here was better than it has been recently. But that large number of very small interventions, very expensive, but will give us a huge benefit in terms of public recognition that we're actually doing something with dropped curbs and better pavement. So if there is anything in that we can emphasise the things we have been doing, that would be good, and continue with more. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Claire Daunton.
I only want to speak about 4.11 on the physical capital, but I'll begin by endorsing the need to work alongside the County Council to connect up greenways to other areas that don't have any cycle paths. I think that's often been said, but I'll say it again. On 4.11, physical capital, you mentioned the possibility to look at the first and last mile connectivity to rail stations, and that's been, I think that was brought up in your answer to Living Streets, and Katie mentioned Cambridge South Station. I think it would really, really helpful to look at all 3 stations, north, south and central, and look at accessibility to all 3, and look at, across the board at equal access to all 3 stations through public transport and walking and wheeling, and have a strategy for all 3 stations.
Thank you. Graham?
Thank you, Chair. And I think everything that everybody has said and what's in the paper is excellent. I'd just like to reinforce some of the comments that Josh made about learning from mistakes that we might have made or best practice that we should be adopting from others. And there is an example on page 76, 4.2 lines 3 and 4, which talk about project impacts on metrics such as journey times are assessed through business case development work. Well, sometimes it's not just the business cases which we need to review. We need to look at post-project appraisal to see whether or not things were delivered as we were expecting them to be delivered, or whether we've gained or not gained as much as we wanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Isabel?
Yeah, thank you. So I think largely those comments are things I think we can kind of reflect on and pick up in terms of taking the work forward, particularly around kind of the walking and taking the benefit from that, and, you know, whether we could do something working with our partners around looking at the 3 stations as well. Completely agree with the comments around post-project appraisal, so that's something that we do have to kind of build into kind of the business cases and to our plans for the Gateway Review. So it's very much around making sure, did we kind of do what we say we would? Yeah.
Thank you. Paul?
Just if I can expand on the comment about stations, so not just the 3 stations, but all the other stations within Greater Cambridge as well. So, for example, Waterbeach is used by people in Cottenham, but there is no link other than driving between the 2. So, yeah, just add those.
Thank you. Seeing no more hands, I wanted to just surface maybe one of the less glamorous potential points to pursue, and that is the one about which is called institutional capital, which sounds so deathly boring, but I do feel that that the City Deal and the GCP has increased a really relevant combined awareness of what is a sort of a functional interrelated area of Greater Cambridge, which and it's definitely increased that amongst councillors who otherwise were primarily focused on their own council and their own area alone. And with Greater Cambridge, I think, as we've kind of maybe even surprised ourselves as we've gone through, shares so much, such that if we do something in one area, it has an effect on the other. And I think GCP has provided that platform to combine for strategy and understanding, which has definitely taken us forward. And I would be the first to say it has also not been perfect, and it's an ugly process even now. But I think that without the platform that the GCP has provided, we would not have done some of the things that we have done. And I think it spills over not just onto the economic issues, but also to the whole agenda for public authorities, where, in cultural terms, people live one place and go another place for culture, and they live in one place and work in another place, and they shop in one place and live in another. So the interrelationship is so high across this area that the existence of the GCP and the City Deal, I think, has allowed that to breathe and flex, and I think a breed of councillors to kind of become more mutually aware of those things, and also with the benefit of the business and university representatives too. So I know it's not glamorous, and I know it sounds deathly boring, but I do think it should be on our radar screen as something that has been a small step forward but needs to be perfected. Anything else? Simon.
I've just got one comment really, which is I'm hearing from members of the Assembly that they want to see more about the impacts, how this is affecting people's lives, whereas I think the tone of this is more about outputs. Now, if we say we're tackling inequality, then we had a baseline when we started. Well, where are we now? What are the indicators? What's shifted? Or is only the impact been to mitigate widening inequalities? Because obviously, the forces at work about inequalities are much more powerful than the GCP can reverse. And so I think that would be set a more appropriate tone, is the emphasis on impact. And I think some of the contributions I've heard from colleagues on the Assembly are actually addressing that particular point. And again, I think the institutional capital point that Tim's just made is really significant, because it's not boring at all, Tim. It's very interesting, because what it means is that we've had a body that has had the capacity and capabilities of delivering a massive infrastructure programme. Notwithstanding, we're not going to achieve the big one. So much has been done, and you're right, Chair, that would never have been delivered without this organisation.
Simon? Isabel? Seeing no other hands, I think this is the last time we come back to you.
Thank you. I think when we kind of get to the complementary report and we write that, you will see much more about the impacts. I think we haven't done all of that analysis, but the kind of paper starts to set out how we might go about some of that. So hopefully kind of you'll enjoy reading that, and very much if that kind of surfaces kind of new opportunities, which we expect it will, we'll bring those back to you. And again, they can inform that kind of future piece around, where do we go next? Because, as we've discussed, this isn't kind of the end of the growth. So, that is going to be underway.
Okay. So, I'm going to try and rule a line under this report. So we agreed to ask for a specific report so we can talk about the contents of the green and blue strategy, rather than just recognise that it's a good thing that we have one. I think we're happy to do today. And then we've generated a number of areas where I think people feel that there should be some emphasis, or if there isn't already, about making sure that we are working with our partners to do things that we can't, but we can maybe have an influence and make space for. And we've talked about that in relation to the City Council. We talked about that in relation to the County Council, specifically on the walking strategy, which there's been an advocacy for from here. Quite a lot of emphasis on station accessibility to improve access to transport that we don't run and don't influence. And I think at the point about institutional capital has been made and got a bit of support, and significance of post-project appraisals, so that we actually can try and capture in finite terms some of these things too. So I think we probably have discharged the requests of us, and I'll make sure we pass those comments along to the board. So thank you very much, Isabel. And we go to the last of our items on the agenda, which is the City Access Programme update, which Peter's going to present to us shortly. We have some public questioners who we will take first. So I've got 4 of them. If Tina Riches, on behalf of Mill Road for People, would come forward and get yourself ready. I'll just read out the other people as well. I've got Josh Grantham after that. Sarah Hughes is going to read a question, has got a question of her own, is going to read a question from Richard Wood on behalf of the Cambridge Area Bus Users Group as well. So Cambridge, Sarah has 2 questions. So let's get on. And Tina, would you like to go ahead?
Hi, morning. Mill Road for People is a campaigning organisation with over 1,000 signed-up supporters. And our question today is in 2 key parts. The first one is about quick wins. Are you aware that Mill Road for People has done much work around suggestions for quick wins for improvements on Mill Road? A document detailing some initial points covering things like more zebra crossings, speed indicators, parklets, pavement parking, etc. Was sent on the 23rd of June 23 to Councillors Shaler and Howitt, and attached to that, or it was attached to this question, so it has been received. Can you confirm that our document content will be passed to the relevant officers, or has been already passed to them, and that its recommendations will be given very serious consideration in any planning for Mill Road, bearing in mind that Mill Road for People now represents over 1,000 mainly local supporters? A second question is around pavement parking. Mill Road for People has been conducting a hugely popular campaign called Pavement for People, if you'll excuse the pun, and it's aimed at tackling illegal pavement parking, or to put it more correctly, illegal driving onto a pavement and then parking, but we just use the term pavement parking. We're calling for individual bike racks to be installed along the edges of pavements parallel to the road in all places where the pavement width is sufficient. This would create a barrier to pavement parking and provide much needed extra bike parking. Also, could you confirm that at least one of your demonstrator projects will be aimed at tackling pavement parking on Mill Road, and that our proposal will be given serious consideration? Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry, Tina. Sorry, confusing my list of names. We'll come back to that in a moment. Sarah Hughes. Oh, sorry. It's a bit confused by the fact that Sarah's got 2 questions. So, Sarah, you do both of your questions now.
So my first question is on behalf of Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance. We're in alliance with 31 member organisations active in the areas of transport, environment and health. Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance is deeply disappointed that the GCP is recommending setting aside the road reclassification project, substantially reducing the money spent on city access projects, and reorienting city access away from the large-scale transformation of transport infrastructure the City Deal was established to bring about. Changing the way Cambridge's roads are classified could have transformed the city for the better. It could have allowed buses to run on time. Over half of bus users we interviewed in Cambridge thought non-park and ride services were late or unreliable. It could have made walking, wheeling and cycling much easier, safer and more pleasant. It could have given us cleaner air to breathe, and it could have made the city a much more attractive place. If the road reclassification project is cancelled, as well as the Sustainable Travel Zone road charge, and there are no plans by the GCP or others to pursue a workplace parking levy or other transformative options, in 2030, the year in which Cambridge City aims to reach net zero, Cambridge will still largely be encumbered with its 1980s road system designed to prioritise motorised transport over sustainable travel. In contrast, many other UK cities are planning or have taken bold steps to transform transport. Edinburgh will further restrict traffic through its city centre. Oxford is going ahead with traffic filters and low traffic neighbourhoods. Bristol has a clean air zone. Central London has an effective congestion charge and recently extended the ULEZ to all Greater London boroughs. And Nottingham has a workplace parking levy. Page 103 of the agenda pack references the GCP objective to reduce traffic by 15% compared to the 2011 baseline. To what extent does the GCP think it will meet this objective with neither a transformational transport plan, like a road charge, nor a reclassification of Cambridge's roads?
Thank you, Sarah. And whilst you're sitting there, the second one.
So I'm reading out Richard Wood's question, which he's asking on behalf of Cambridge area bus users. Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority has recently engaged extensively with a wide range of stakeholders as part of its bus network review in order to assess local needs and identify new opportunities. Stakeholders included community groups, several Cambridgeshire Sustainable Travel Alliance member organisations took part, as well as businesses, local leaders and councillors, parish councils, educational institutions and healthcare providers. The engagement not only enabled CPCA to review the existing tendered services it supports, it also generated ideas for many new services CPCA could support, some of which will in all probability go ahead due to the increase in the mayoral precept. While Cambridge area bus users is disappointed that the potentially most impactful city access projects will likely not proceed, we believe that localised improvements can still be made through a programme of seeding quick wins and demonstrator projects, coupled with a behaviour change programme. How is the GCP planning to engage with stakeholders, including residents' associations and community groups such as ours, to identify quick wins and demonstrator projects to which the GCP could commit seed corn funding, enabling them to be delivered within the lifetime of the city bill?
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll come to that. Josh, would you like to do yours?
Political indecision continues to stifle Cambridge, affecting businesses, residents, health and the environment. 18 months after the consultation on the road hierarchy, this paper does nothing more but to reflect the statistical facts of the consultation response and passes off responsibility to the Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy at an unknown date in the future. Many will speculate this procrastination reflects an inability to reduce congestion, and downgrading roads is indeed more difficult without first reducing traffic. However, it is definitely not impossible. And, as proposed, the road hierarchy was never intended to be a scheme that was to be implemented all at once. Our 18-page response, which I have copies of and I would suggest you all read, compiled with the help of our 1,700 members, questioned the car-centric approach of the hierarchy, starkly highlighted by the fundamental misunderstanding of the word road, when in fact what was being discussed was streets. We set out a user approach and looked at the continent for inspiration. We drew attention to how other cities manage circulation, taking specific inspiration from those that do so without a road charging scheme. One of the best examples of this in a small city is Ghent in Belgium, which controls vehicle movements of its 300,000 residents through a circulation plan. Introduced in 2017, it was delivered in under 3 years for less than €5 million. Results have included a 60% increase in cycling, a 55% increase in public transport use, 35% reduction in road collisions, and a 15% increase in greenery, replacing previously paved areas. 71% of inner city residents say that it's a more pleasant place to now live. Whilst it's important to have a quick wins package, it could be described as a band-aid on a bullet wound. We've always needed a bigger scheme. Why doesn't the GCP believe that such a scheme could be delivered as part of the City Access Programme?
Thanks very much, Josh. Peter, would you like to comment on all four of those questions?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of Tina Rich's question, we have received that information. Councillor Shaler passed it to us when he received it. The County Council is the lead agency on the Mill Road project at the moment. Clearly, it is going through a legal process. Following the outcome of that legal process, we will be happy to continue our dialogue with county colleagues on what happens next. Clearly, if the Assembly and the Board support the idea of some sort of quick win list, then that could be added to those considerations. In terms of Sarah Hughes's and actually Josh Grantham's question, a lot of it is sort of over, there's a link between the two. The paper doesn't propose pausing the road hierarchy review. What it says is, we've had a consultation. There needs to be rightly reflection of what it says, but we also need to be cognizant of other developments that have occurred since that time. One clearly is the Making Connections decision, but in particular, as outlined in the paper, and I'll touch on later on, is the County Council's decision that it will update the transport strategy for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, because much like the local plan that we rely on that strategy. So in terms of the 15% target reduction, we're not proposing to get rid of that. Indeed, the combined authority has a general one across that area. And so the issue around road network hierarchy and managing the congested environment in Cambridge will clearly need to be considered as part of that transport strategy development that will take place. And so the question about what happens by 2030 will need to be considered in that context. We were always going to pass the road network hierarchy onto the County Council. They are the Highways Authority. So that link exists very clear now in terms of the development of the transport strategy going forward. In terms of the question around Richard's question on bus users, we're happy to confirm that the usual processes will apply. So if the Assembly and the Board endorses the development of a list of quick wins, we will go through our usual consultation processes built on the existing data that we've got from Making Connections, from road hierarchy review, from Citizens Assembly and the like. And if we were going to take any of those proposals forward, then we will go through the detailed consultation that Richard and other stakeholder groups and indeed residents would expect. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter, and that's obviously backcloth to what we can now talk about. I think what we've been asked to look at, you can see on page 85 that the lettered points are the issues that the board is going to be asked to decide on, and so I'm going to suggest that we regard those as our focal points for our discussion. So the first of those, I think, is necessary to look at first. That is the update on bus reform, wider transport strategy from the County Council and the Combined Authority. And this is what appears in the report on page 86 to 87. Give an opportunity for anyone to comment or question on what's in that section before we get on with the rest. Neil.
Thank you very much, Chair. On, I think it's page 86, about the BSIP. This is in relation to the Combined Authority. And clearly, a multi-user ticket has implications in the Greater Cambridge area as well, but these need to work together. It's always interesting to make sure that these different networks work together. And I keep saying that every bus stop is an active transport hub. and was mentioned before, there's a problem with connectivity between buses and trains. In the Greater Cambridge area, in Whittlesea, they have no connectivity. We're hoping to put in a connection to Maney Station from Chatteris, for instance. This happens all over the place. It's not just the Greater Cambridge area. But I haven't seen in the report that focus, more focus on making sure that the active transport networks, and as was mentioned before, we're trying to work out a kind of an A and B road for active transport routes in regard to maintenance and which ones are most important, but how they fit together with the bus network and with trains, all of these things working together. I would like to see a little bit more focus on that, or if you have more comments to make on that. The other part of it is, of course, making space for buses. You know, we didn't get to do road user charging that would have reduced the number of congestion. We have a more efficient network in Peterborough for buses, for instance, than in Cambridge, where the need is arguably greater. So how are we going to make space for buses in Cambridge? Either create new pavement or push cars out of existing pavement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Neil. I'm going to ask Peter to respond to that, but I'm also going to ask him to present his report, which I forgot to do.
Sorry.
No. It was useful thinking time. But we will cover what you've said. So, Peter, could you present the overall report?
Chair, I'm not sure I could present it any better than you did. I mean, this is in the context of City Access. This is a relatively short report that brings forward an update on next steps. The key questions are outlined as the chair has noted in para 1.2. And then, so just to focus on that, clearly there's an update we've provided in terms of the mayor's work and the combined authorities' works on buses, and Neil sort of alluded to some of that in his questioning. I've referenced the County Council updating of, 2014 was the last policy for transport of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So it clearly feels as if that needs to be updated and needs to be reflective of that. In terms of then the need for us as a body, as I say, we rely on the local plan, we rely on the local transport strategy context, and therefore in that context, the road hierarchy review should be folded in, because clearly how you manage traffic and transportation in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire is inextricably linked to how you manage that network. There's a proposal to tweak the objectives of the City Access Programme, making quite clear that we're not moving away from 15%, but we talk at the moment around particularly public transport and raising money, and whether, in light of recent discussions, that needs to be changed and outlined, or changes to that. And then finally, there's the suggestion that actually there may well be a series of opportunities around quick wins, some of which have been talked about in terms of whether it's footways, walking and wheeling, whether it's access to things like rail stations and other things that you've had in your previous conversation. Maybe if I stop there, Chair, and we go from there.
Thank you, Peter. I wonder if you could help us understand a little bit more what it is we expect the County Council to be doing with this Greater Cambridge Transport Strategy. I think I recognise what you say, that there was a strategy before. I think they called it Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire at the time, but it's the same area. And that was before we came into business. And that was a sort of a broad enabling strategy, which effectively we inherited and have provided a lot of the investment to deliver. But that was, in terms of the County Council, was an enabling strategy, which there wasn't the funds to deliver, which was the reason we got the City deal and we got the Greater Cambridge Partnership. So what do we expect when the County Council undertakes this all over again? enabling strategy, and if it is, who's going to deliver it and with what?
I don't think this is a blank piece of paper. Strategy evolves over months and years, and many of the challenges that were experienced by, by yourself, by the county, by our residents and communities in 2015 are still here. Indeed, some of them are more, are really more acute. There is a delivery programme that we've all agreed. That our delivery programme didn't come out of thin air. It came out of that transport strategy the County Council developed. And so that delivery programme, which takes us to 2030, subject to the conversation we had with Simon earlier on, is whether it's 20 something else, actually, everything that we see in our programme should be considered as set. And I would expect the County Council absolutely to do that. But then there are questions that have been raised by questioners this morning around, well, what are you going to do with the network hierarchy? What are you going to do about the challenge of congestion going forward? And those are considerations that this piece of work will have to grapple with. The transport strategy, if you imagine there's a sort of suite of policy positions, so you start with the local transport connectivity strategy, which got more broader coverage, more generic, more thematic areas. And the idea of a Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire strategy really drills that down into much more detail that I think we, local planning partners and others, will be able to see and reflect going forward.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this first section 2? Claire? Katie?
Yeah, so it might be, I want to try to tie together the what's been said here about the County Council's work on the Park and Ride with the quick wins. I'm happy to take it later if you would prefer, but I think it brings together the two issues, and it's also just ties in with what Peter was just saying. So that one of the points in the paper refers to the County Council's work on considering changing to the operating model for Park and Ride and busways. It seems to me that's one critical area where the GCP could come in and help support what the County Council wants to do with the functioning of the Park and Ride, both the buses themselves, which of course have GCP money already, but also the hubs. I'd really like to ask a little bit more about how that partnership with the County Council might work going forward.
Yeah, you're right. That's not really in section 2, but we'll log it. Yeah, that's yeah. I've got Katie. Claire, would you turn your mic up?
Sorry.
So there's an existing road hierarchy. We're talking about a new one. There is an existing one. And I just wondered, does that remain a live document? Is emphasis given to looking at it and actually delivering on the existing road hierarchy? And that's one question. I've got another question. I've got 3. Another is actually picking up on Claire Daunton's point, is the Park and Rides. We talked about calling these travel hubs, and really what I think that to really enable people who want to come into Cambridge but to not drive into the centre, these need to be really comprehensive travel hubs. They need, at the moment, when you can only catch a bus into the centre of town from the travel hub, you can't go even to North Cambridge train station. You can't reliably drop your children off with big school bags and sports gear and ensure that they're safe either to get into school but also to get back before you can pick them up. So to give opportunity to people not to drive, they need to be much more comprehensive in my view, and that really think about expanding them and having facilities. The other point I wanted to talk about was about the rail strategy that's the CPA are going to be developing with the county for Cambridgeshire. But Cambridgeshire, it's not good enough just to have it for Cambridgeshire. Our rail connectivity to the whole region is absolutely critical. Cambridge Station has, the footfall has increased 660% last county council transport strategy since 2014, and those through every single target and every single aspiration has been met. It's the only form of transport where every target has been, a full page of targets has been met. And that those were for fairly minor quick wins. And more people travel in from Bury St Edmunds into Cambridge by train than go to London now. And we need to, people drive to Stansted because the trains do not start, you cannot get there before the early flights. You cannot get home by train after the late flights. And there are gaps in the middle of the train programme to get to Stansted. So people drive through Cambridge. It's so that the train strategy needs to be with Cambridge in the middle of all of the critical train routes. And the potential is absolutely phenomenal, I think. So I'm really pleased it's there, but not just Cambridgeshire, but the whole wider area for catchment on trains. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. Claire Ruskin.
Thank you, Katie. That's very well said. From a business point of view, this section of the paper sort of demonstrates the complications of the overlapping governance that we've got. It feels as though some rather hazy feedback from the public is being shared between lots of different bodies to consult some more and get some more hazy feedback from the public. So I'm concerned about that. I would love some crisp actions from GCP if we possibly could. The Ghent project has sounded for some time like a brilliant, low-cost, compelling way of doing something. We've looked at various different international solutions. It would be great to have a crisp 3-week look at Ghent, see whether we could put some of these systems in place. GCP has a role to play here.
Thank you, Claire. I think it's the question whether the GCP does have a role to play there, but Peter, would you like to comment on those points so far? I've got Neil and Karen next.
Yeah, well, and just in terms of Neil's first question, I mean, in terms of space for buses, that is always a challenge. We're doing it already. We've done it on Histon Road. We're doing it on Milton Road. We talked about signals earlier on. But there is no magic wand that will deal with the problems of buses within the Cambridge environment, because it is incredibly challenged to run bus services. Claire, the operating model for Park and Ride, I mean, we're already heavily involved in that operating model. We subsidise the car parking charges. We've invested in terms of improving the sites themselves, particularly in terms of the energy creation. We're looking to put a lot of our greenways and infrastructure, so move that to very much sort of Katie's thought around the hub. Clearly, there is a lot more that can be done. There's a big question that's hanging out there at the moment, which is what's going to happen with bus services more generally. And I think we probably need to answer that question around what bus reform looks like. And then we need to come back to how do we make the improvements that we want to see at Park and Ride sites. And some of them, it's a case of, it's a case of picking up the baton in investment. Some of them are a little bit more challenging in terms of changing the role of those Park and Ride sites that are often in the green belt and often come with planning restrictions that we need to be respectful of. We need to work with our local planning partners on. But I think absolutely it's an important point. I think we need to reflect on where the Mayor and the Combined Authority gets to in sort of March around their decisions on next steps. Katie, your point on road hierarchy I think is right. The road, a road network is almost a living, breathing thing. It's continuing to change. We'll change signals, we'll change priority. We might try, we talked about modal filter earlier on in terms of Mill Road. That's going to continue to happen. The idea of a network hierarchy review was almost to say, actually, in a period of time, we need to look at that entire network and then decide whether we're going to make some more impactful changes over the entire network rather than the sort of gradual change that naturally take place. Now that needs to be considered in if there's a transport strategy being developed for this geography, it needs to be considered as part of that. I'll come back to rail, but this sort of strays in with Claire's first point. We do work in a complex governance environment. And I understand the complexity that that might bring, you know, certainly to residents. But we need to be respectful of it, because there is no point in ploughing a particular, in this case, network hierarchy furrow, if actually the policies are going to change and decisions around that have already been made. We need to be working hand in glove as various agencies to say that actually we'll have one conversation around updating the 2014 strategy, and that will include that network hierarchy, and all of these things are considered at one point. And I think your quick wins and Ghent and other is not just going to fall to Greater Cambridge Partnership because of that environment within which we work. We have delegated responsibility for our defined programme, and we need to be respectful. You know, if I put my tanks on the planner's turf, quite rightly, they would be up in arms. Exactly the same with the Highway Authority's turf. So we need to be respectful of them. Finally, in terms of rail again, let's understand that it's a combined authority or it's a county council, but we've done a lot in this space. We did a rail corridor study way back in 2018, 2019. The highlight of which, it was no surprise to anybody, if we don't upgrade the Newmarket line, it's going to fall over. You know, that's the number one pressing priority for commuting issues within our geography. But as you say, Katie, the growth on Cambridge Station is off the scale. And guess what? If we open a new rail station just to the south of the biomedical campus, that's probably going to be placing more pressure on that. So can we work to deliver infrastructure improvements around those stations? Clearly, we have a role in that. In terms of developing that strategy, that doesn't sit with the Greater Cambridge Partnership. Hopefully, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just aware of the need to put a bit of structure into this, because otherwise we're going to be wandering all over the shop. I want to make sure that we have got all the contributions relative to the road hierarchy review. And I've got Neil and Karen, and Heather, sorry, you're sitting almost behind me. I can't look forward. I can only just see you. So Neil, Karen and Heather, but I want to try and focus on the network hierarchy review so that we can move on to some of the other sections. Neil, then.
Thank you, Chair. I want to briefly come back. We've kind of skirted around it a bit, but to 2.2 again on the relationship between the buses. Obviously, this is about timing of the, you know, it takes 32 minutes to go from Cambridge to March by rail, and then there's nothing, you know. But in order to get those buses to schools, all of those things, and what we're getting from bus operators is often, you know, why would we support another mode? You know, they're almost competing with rail. So my question is, to what extent are we waiting for bus reform before we can do the stuff that I think everybody wants to do? And how does that timing work with the GCP? Obviously, this is something that's going through the combined authority at the moment. You need franchising to do most of this.
Thanks, Neil. Karen?
Thanks. Yeah, we clearly need to do something here, and we're really keen to have those conversations about how we move forward. Anything that does go forward clearly needs to be evidence-based, and where possible to take a holistic and integrated approach working with the various delivery partners. Specifically in relation to the road hierarchy review, we'd be keen to see this revisited. One of the concerns that we had with the existing review and the evidence that's been presented back to us for this meeting was that the activities of the university and its colleges, which have a very significant presence in the centre of the city, of the town, were not represented adequately, along with the access and transport needs of those. So the significant educational, research and even residential activity and all the needs and support of that taking place in the centre of the city, and that needs to be adequately considered in this, please. We also wondered about the imbalance of some of the proposals as well, and again going back to the need for for evidence in the fact that, for example, some of the routes to the Grand Arcade car park, which clearly is a big congestion generator and pollution generator, seem to be given disproportionate, I guess, protection versus other routes, which you could say were more lightly used. So it'd be really good, and I think that did come out in the report, that people were calling for more evidence in some of the proposals that were being put forward as well.
Thanks, Karen. Heather.
Thank you. I think the first sort of plea that I would say of anything that's going forward is about future-proofing, because we don't know how technologies are going to advance. We don't know lots of things. And I mean, personally, I'm a strong believer that buses are not the way forward. Like, they're a part of a way to resolve the problems that we have, but they're not the be-all and that's going to magically resolve the problems. So I think it's important to make sure that whatever happens next is future-proofed, bearing that in mind. And the other thing, when looking at this, is I think it's really important. I think it's very easy for us to slip into looking at numbers and moving numbers almost around a spreadsheet and thinking, okay, well, that's the quickest route for them and that's the quickest route for them. But the reality is we are human beings, we are unpredictable, we make impulsive decisions, not necessarily logical decisions. And I think a lot of the issues we've had on certain projects and trying to pursue them further is we're just thinking data-driven, and data does have a key role in decisions. I'm not questioning that, but we have to think about the human response to the actions that are taken, because there's no point having a change hierarchy that people are just not going to get on board with. We do need buy-in to do these things. And I say that as well about the human element in relation to, like, for the parking. So you can see on page 99, it sort of says about the reality and the future vision. And then it says about specific needs for someone like a blue badge. Now, I'm very lucky that a couple of weeks ago, my granddad turned 100, and he got very proud to get his birthday card from the King. But literally 4 years ago, when he was 96, he did not qualify for a blue badge because he could walk X amount of metres. Whereas reality is he couldn't cope, any further than that. So I think we sometimes look and say, oh, blue badge, we're going to capture everybody that needs it. But actually, there's a lot of people, particularly older people, that won't be able to cycle, can walk enough to not qualify for a blue badge, but would actually do have accessibility needs. And sometimes there are certain things as well that don't qualify for blue badges that when you've got a young family can be incredibly difficult. For example, my daughter is partially deaf, and keeping a 1- and 2-year-old to keep hearing aids in is incredibly hard. You actually do need to sometimes get closer because there is a risk when they're toddling, and if the hearing aids slip, they're not going to hear you if you've got these interventions that don't fit into day-to-day life, and actually it's very difficult to deal with those anyway if you then feel like there's decisions and a system that's making your life even harder. Fortunately now, I can get in front of her and she can hear, but it was really difficult and she would not have fitted into any of these categories. So please bear that in mind.
Thanks, Heather. Anything you'd like to comment on that?
A couple of things, Chair. So are we waiting for bus reform? No, you're committed to spending £600 million on public transport improvements across our area. £600 million. I don't say a lot. It sounds, you say it quick, right? If you just think back to pre the St. Ives busway, and you've got plans for 2, and if we can get the CSET's money, there's 3. Milton Road, drive up, walk up, cycle up, use Histon Road. It's a different environment, and that benefits buses. We're doing the same thing on Milton when you're looking at Newmarket Road. So we're not waiting for bus reform. Bus reform clearly may well offer further opportunities, and we've talked about that earlier on. Karen, I think you exemplified exactly why more work is required on the hierarchy review, and therefore you can't rush it, and that's why it needs to be folded in. And similarly, I think, Heather, in terms of that's why consultation is important. You can't just look at boxes. And I think also just a bit of a plug for SMART. I think that's why we're doing the SMART work stream. So all the great stuff that's going on autonomous vehicles, and data apps and things like that. You know, the future is going to change. We're going to move in different ways, and the more that we can think about that, I think the better the outcome will come of it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Peter. So on the road hierarchy review point that we've been focused on, it seems to me that we're being informed that is going to be taken on by the county council, and yet the views around this assembly are that that we need to be actively involved in that, and we would like to be following through with our input on that, which obviously is going to require some structure, because we can all make speeches about this, but I think it means that we would like to see options, evaluations, and have the opportunity to input to those, as we would if it was being done by the GCP. And it sort of seems slightly, less through the looking glass arrangement now, because the county council is one of our partners. Previously, they've been supposed to be participating in things that we've been driving. I suppose this is turning the tables somewhat, but I think we need to see a proper formal route for us to input, and I don't think, lots of people are saying that there is an opportunity still to make a difference with the road hierarchy review. It's not a dead end. We would like to be involved in ascertaining what those things are and having our view. I would like to just pass through the sections of the report that deal with some of the other thrusts of the City Access Programme, particularly integrated parking strategy, rate consolidation, which there are substantial sections on here, to see if there are any comments on those. We haven't been asked particularly for an opinion on those, but we have the opportunity to give one. Heather.
So before we go on to the next, I just wanted to clarify whether in recommendation D, that was the right paragraph reference, because when I read that paragraph, it might just be the way I'm reading it. It felt like 10.4 was more about the objectives than 10.5. So that could be, I just wasn't sure if that was the right paragraph reference.
Well, let's deal with that in a minute, because I'm going to come at the end to the question about updating the objectives of the programme. I wanted to talk about some of the streams of work that come before that. So we've talked about, it should be 9.5, so you're right, it's not the right one. Yeah, but let's, first of all, are there any comments that people want to make about the integrated parking strategy? Because that's another strand of the City Access Programme, less obviously impacted by the Making Connections departure. And so I just wondered if there are any comments that people want to make on that. So those specific invitations on that subject now. Neil.
The integrated parking strategy obviously has some implications for freeing up some of this public space. And so I'm related to, it says in 10.4, which is actually a little bit after this, but using space for pocket parks and that sort of stuff. And of course on county we're very involved in playing out streets and in the way that we use. Now, these are obviously related to the parking strategy and other ways that we can make better use of our public spaces.
Thank you. Katie?
Regarding the residence parking schemes, it's generally it says you're consulting with councillors, but they tend to be county councillors, not city councillors. And I think that's the formal consultation is with county councillors, but I think it's important that city councillors have an opportunity to be involved wherever possible. Another thing is the parking strategy, a major, the not proceeding with the STZ has a major impact on how, if we aim to how we deal with parking strategy. I think it was if the STZ went through, if it had gone through, it would have had a major impact on the final parking strategy. I think a lot of it is to do with financial gains from the current parking arrangement. So it'd be interesting to see what might have been proposed before compared to what we need to consider now. And I agree with what Councillor Shayla was saying about when we do review residential parking schemes. I think that's the only, at the moment, that seems to be the only opportunity to consider things like pocket parks and things like that.
Thank you, Katie. I wanted to make a point of my own here. I looked back at what I assume has been past us in the past on the integrated parking strategy objectives and vision and so forth, and I felt that in one sense it's saying all the right things, but actually seems to be skating around the main issue. And I suppose with the absence of making connections, it seems to me that more important that we don't skate around the main issue and what we expect strategically from this. I mean, aren't we really looking for less non-resident parking in the city, leading to more use of alternatives to vehicle trips? I mean, it doesn't actually say that anywhere here. It talks about all the benefits of aspects of this, but the reason that this got on our agenda in the first place was that that we wanted to deter vehicle trips into the city, and that seems to me still valid. I utterly accept that there are all sorts of neighbourhood, community, environmental benefits that flow from that, but I don't think they would have got that on our agenda on their own. And I just wonder whether we should be a little bit more clear about that in the way we're pursuing this.
So I'm happy
because
to...
I'm chairing this now, but Peter.
I'm happy to reassure the Chair that both on parking and freight, you will be getting further reports. And so for the reasons that Katie outlined, that actually parking changes with or without an STZ, your parking strategy, we've now got a clear position on that, and so there will be an updated position on parking for your considerations as to whether we've covered all of the aspects or not.
Yeah, I think I was saying something a bit...
I
really welcome the future reports, but I think I was saying that it's particularly the role of parking in generating the demand for sustainable transport. And that is not really said here. And so if the future reports are going to not lose sight of that, that would be good reassurance.
The Chair has said it. I'm sure it will be in the minutes. And the next time I sit here with parking, then I would hope I will have an answer to that question.
Okay, all right. Simon.
I'm looking at all of this, and I think I'm looking at a jigsaw, and the different pieces of the jigsaw, and I'm just kind of, I've got this feeling that coming over me now that we need to be integrating it all together rather than looking at it as individual, quick wins. I think I'm very suspicious about the concept of a quick win. It needs to be part of the big picture now, which is post-STZ world. And we need to, it's no good just, I think as the Chair has said, it's no good just letting the County Council run off with this. We've got to be working together to actually realise which are the most impactful of these initiatives, these measures, which order should we be running them in, how much marriage value can we then realise, and then that needs to inform the hierarchy review. It's no having aspirational hierarchy review without it actually being demonstrably deliverable. And I think this is the point that I think Tim was making as well, that we need to work together on this, so it informs a strategy that can work. And within all of that, there has to be public consent.
Agree. Claire?
Yes, I want to ask a question about freight, and if you would indulge me, I have to leave at 2:45 to catch a park and ride bus.
So can we just, before you start that then?
Yeah.
That we finished commenting on the integrated parking strategy. Folks, yep, go ahead, Claire. We're
Okay,
on to
thanks.
freight.
Otherwise, I will miss my park and ride bus. On the freight consolidation, it mentions the city. It doesn't mention the areas around the city. And there are many areas around the city that are really concerned about freight and use of freight. And County Council has a new HGV policy. And I wondered if there'd been any working with the County Council, not just on the city, but on the areas around the city that are really concerned about freight.
Thanks, Claire. Any other points on freight then now? Heather, then Paul.
It was just, and we were very well reminded earlier about why the GCP was set up, was about growth. And obviously freight will have economic impacts. Yes, we need to try and make things more sustainable, and as you say, is particularly the concerns are when HGV restrictions, for example, come in, then HGVs will take unsuitable routes, or you had in my patch a standoff between a combine harvester and a HGV that thought they'd take a shortcut through a very narrow lane. So we've got to really manage this very carefully in that removing things so we don't, make sure we don't have these incidences, but also that whatever we're doing, it doesn't have an impact that means that we would affect the growth, which is what we're here, primarily to sort out. So I think this one will require some fine balancing.
Thank you. Paul?
Just wanted to make a point about delivery vehicles. It's at the forefront of my mind because my son was knocked off his bike by a delivery vehicle yesterday. Fortunately, he was all right at 17, he bounced. But it seems to me that this is an area which is where there's a lot of growth, and we need to consider this quite carefully. And I think there's a lot of growing evidence, actually, that rather than having a 2 or 3 ton van delivering a little parcel about that big, they can be delivered much more quickly by cargo bike. So it'd be really nice to have that as a focus.
Thank you, Paul. Now I saw us, Forest Hands, Neil and Katie. Yes?
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to support your comment, Chair, about not being shy to say that we do want to reduce congestion. And it's the same in many other parts. I'm on a working group for a Whittlesea bypass road because of the problems of congestion there. It is a problem. We need to have alternatives to it, and I don't think we should be shy to say that. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. Katie?
Yes, I just want to talk about freight again. I think the government's long-term plans is to double the amount of imports coming into Felixstowe, and therefore and most of that, a lot of that goes on the road. The HGVs, the freight goes on the roads. But by 2040, there's an obligation, currently hasn't been dropped, for no more diesel HGVs, new diesel HGVs, and no new trains, diesel trains by 2040. So the technology for electric trains is well advanced, but the technology for alternatives to HGVs is really problematic. So we really need to encourage the HGVs onto trains. And we can't, the thought of the number of doubling the HGVs on the A14 is just horrific. Every effort must be with the train strategy is to get HGVs onto the trains. But we need to be really thinking about the rail network for freight and deliveries, long-term deliveries, short, last mile deliveries. We need major logistic sites where the train stations are, and we need minor logistic sites to get the last miles into not just Cambridge, but the rural cities as well. So I'm just saying, please, the train strategy needs to cover freight as well.
Before I go to Peter to wrap up the freight consolidation points, just wanted to add that I find there's an overwhelming desire to identify how things could be done differently. and even describe what those different ways are. But isn't the real thing here about how to leverage any of them to happen? Because, you know, we are not the people doing the deliveries or generating the need for them. It's between businesses. I am completely ignorant of, is there a demand from them for a different way of doing things? And if there isn't, how are we going to create that demand? I've sat through so many conversations over the years about how freight consolidation is the answer, is the way forward, but you know, it actually never happens, and I suspect it requires businesses to feel that carrying on like they are doesn't work for them, or that something that is so obviously better that they immediately jump away from what they do. And the problem being that if we create that situation here, a lot of them are tied into national arrangements and national sources of freight that we're asking for national organisations to depart from what they do everywhere else just here, which there's an obvious resistance for. And I just feel that there needs to be a focus in what happens next on freight into that part of the equation, creating the demand for something different and leverage on our part to actually make these alternatives happen. Peter.
I think that's right, Chair. That's it. In a nutshell, it's stick and carrot with the commercial businesses. They have a commercial view in it. And where things like freight consolidation works, it's because it's in their interests, either with a stick or with a carrot, to make it work. And I think that's how you will bring this to life. In terms, you know, congestion will drive change to a degree. So the fact that we have heavily congested roads drives to a degree. But as Paul was outlining, there's more and more vans out there anyway that are contributing to that congestion. So the hard part on, you know, coming forward with pilots and ideas on freight is relatively straightforward to do. Making it stick is a bit more difficult. And that's why there needs to be a link with Simon's point earlier on about having an integrated strategy that overlays freight in with network hierarchy because you've got a HGV ban, or links then in with other uses around that city environment because we've promoted buses rather than something else. And I think that's the benefit of doing it. One more, just before I stop, just picking on Claire's point. We work hand in glove with the county council, with our local planning colleagues, and with the combined authority. We don't write things that they're not aware of and that they disagree with, and vice versa. In a complex governance environment, but we're working on that basis. And the Chair's point earlier on, I think, around involvement in developing that integrated strategy is absolutely right. Clearly, you have an expectation. Clearly, it will happen. We have a body of evidence that says, you know, from a citizens' assembly to a making connections consultation to a network hierarchy, we've got a body of technical work that will need to be reflected and considered as that's taken forward. And those conversations will take place at an officer level, and I'm sure they will take place at a stakeholder and political level as well. Thank you for the indulgence, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. So one last question on freight, is that? Okay, two last questions on freight then. Heather first.
It may be more of a response to your question, Chair, if I'm honest. So one thing that I have looked into and particularly interested in is Norwich. I don't know if anybody else has seen, and I just double checked it is Norwich, where they've done e-cargo bites, the council for businesses. And about that business buy-in, for them, it's because there is a financial incentive. They're being asked to trial it. They're not being asked to front the cost of trialling something, which obviously for their business is an issue. The council are doing that essentially, and they did get a government grant to do it. But for them, they don't have the maintenance costs of the vehicles. They don't have the fuel costs. So if you want business buy-in, you've got to, you know, show them, and this would be, you know, is a fantastic trial. They've got to have some benefit other than, you know, the environment obviously is important to a lot of people, but a lot of it is bottom line, particularly in the current climate. It has to have an economical advantage for them. And something like this, I think it's quite exciting to see what will come out of that trial. So there are things out there.
Thanks, Heather. Katie, last point on freight.
Just following on from
Peter's point is, I think one thing we could do in this area is look at safeguarding land for logistics centres, whether it's major logistic points or minor ones to enable last mile deliveries, maybe, or even bus depots. Maybe in the emerging local plan, we could be looking at this so that we can put in the right strategy going forward.
Thank you. So it's a short section in passing. There's a section here on the smart work stream. Is there anyone to comment on that? So we then get to the updated city access objectives, which we are asked specifically for a comment on. And I think, resulting from Heather's point, we've been redirected to section 9.5 for that. I just wondered, because we didn't get the full presentation, whether you could just tell us what we're being asked to do and why on this, because it
Yeah,
seems quite
apologies,
important.
Chair. So this is a page turner. So we're comparing paragraphs 3.5 with paragraphs 9.5. One of the learnings officers take from the Assembly, obviously, as well as your guidance, is that I get to amend the report by the time we sit in front of the board. And we'll put 3.5 and 9.5 together, which will probably make everyone's life easier. So essentially, the proposal, in light of previous sort of discussions and where we find ourselves, is to say that the second and third bullet points under 3.5, so where we expressly say about public transport making it more affordable, where we expressly say about raising money, that actually whether they are better sort of characterised in 9.5 as the second bullet point. So we just change that emphasis. So we focus on impact on our programme and recognising that there will be an updated strategy coming forward from the County Council that, as we've described, we will be fully inputting to and supporting. And then, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any comments on this? Katie?
Peter, I know the 9.5, we're talking about 15% traffic reduction compared to 2011. It would actually, I think it would be helpful to actually know the reality of the situation, because the traffic has actually got much worse since 2011. So is it now like a 25% reduction of what we've got now, or is maybe it's even more? I don't know.
It's about 25%.
Claire?
I agree with Katie's point again. Thank you. Having an update would be very helpful for the public perception of what we're actually trying to do, which is massive. I would be disappointed in the new objectives if they didn't still mention increasing access, total access in some way. I know it talks about reducing private car traffic, but increasing total access is why we're trying to do that. And the other thing I'd be disappointed if it doesn't repeat slightly, in different words, is the ensuring the public transport is more effective in some way, because that's, again, a big emphasis. Agree we need to take out the raise the money needed, but those 2 points I would like to see in some way in the objectives.
Thank you. Actually, if I could build on what you said, because I see that that we're no longer looking ourselves at an approach that will come from us to produce the public transport. But I did wonder whether there should be an objective which said more specifically increased demand for sustainable alternatives to the car, because that is something that we can influence through what we do and what we still intend to do. And of course that plugs in to what others are responsible for in terms of providing and maybe funding better public transport. Is there something that we could do there, Peter?
I think it links with Claire's point earlier on, so maybe we'll take that away.
And can I say increasing demand might not be the way we want to put it. We might want to increase modal shift rather than increase demand for buses.
I think we're in the same territory, yes. I wouldn't want to fight you about that.
And I think it is what we were trying to say in the new wording, because that is what the GCP programme is trying to do. So I think what you're asking us is just to be more explicit in drawing that out rather than just referring to the GCP programme. But essentially,
Yes.
we're agreeing with you. That's what we were trying to say. We are doing those things. We are trying to shift people mode, but we say it more explicitly rather than refer to the GCP programme.
Thank you. Christopher?
Just slightly repeats what I said earlier, but picking up on Claire's point, we do need to make the point that this is all about enabling a lot more people to move in around through the city and the area, a lot more than we started with. It's not just managing a static position. It is back to the growth point. Really should be in that.
Okay. I had another comment that what I think I've heard is that there are this possible negative to what was expected to happen through the local plan, through the abandonment of making connections. And if that is the case, then shouldn't it be one of our remaining objectives from City Access to mitigate as much of that as possible? Katie?
Yeah, specifically on that point, I think the Assembly needs a comprehensive plan about the effect of not proceeding with the STZ on the congestion we have now and the effect on the current local plan and the emerging local plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's all part of the same thing, and I agree as well with that. Peter?
So that technical work is still ongoing. I think we should reflect in the local plan. I think we'll find a way of reflecting the local plan issues in, but I think until we've concluded that technical work and examined the implications, I think we're probably not in a position to outline it explicitly, Chair.
Okay. But I'll try and find a way of reflecting that in our report to the board, I think, because I think it's an important dimension. Are there any other points on this whole report now? I mean, I think we've somewhat zigzag way got our way through it, and I think that we have some comments on the points that we've been asked for them. Are people happy with that, or does anyone want to add something else? Okay, well, I'm happy to say then that we've got to the end of our agenda. Thank you very much, everyone. And I normally say when our next meeting is, it's on Thursday, the 6th of June at 2:00. So thank you very much for your getting through this before lunchtime. So thank you very much and see you next time.